I want you to take a second and just look around wherever you are right now. Like, really look.
Yeah, if you're sitting in a room, look at the painted walls. Or if you're walking down the street, look at the asphalt or the trees.
Right, exactly. Usually when we talk about the physical world, we focus entirely on the surface. We basically just look at the skin of the world.
Well, I mean, that's just human nature. We only engage with the interfaces built for us. We see the polished wood floor, not the joists underneath.
Yeah, but I want you to mentally strip all of that away for a minute. Like, give yourself X-ray vision of your surroundings.
Oh, that's a wild thought.
Right. I want you to think about the thousands of nails invisibly gripping those floorboards together. Or, visualize the rigid cage of rebar that's hidden inside the concrete pillars of the building you're in.
Yeah, or the incredibly dense, heavy block of metal powering the vehicle sitting in your driveway.
Exactly. If we actually had X-ray vision, we would realize that we are completely, entirely blind to the true skeleton of our world. We live inside this massive, heavy cage of metal, and we just forget it's there.
It's what you might call infrastructural blindness. We treat the skeleton of civilization like it's just background noise. We assume it has always been there and, well, always will be.
And it's not just any metal either. Today, we are going on a massive, comprehensive deep dive into element 26, iron.
A fascinating element to dig into.
It really is. And my goal today is to unpack humanity's ultimate bargain with the earth. How we traded sweat, smoke, and literal blood for the power of this one specific element.
It's a heavy topic, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, because diving into all this material, I am just struck by the paradox of it. I mean, iron is the dirt outside your window. It is the most mundane, gritty, blue-collar material imaginable.
Right.
And yet, it is completely cosmic. It's magical.
It truly is. I mean, if you want to understand human ambition, our most towering triumphs, and our absolute darkest exploitations, you have to look at iron.
Absolutely.
But you're right. To really grasp the scale of this, we have to strip away the skyscrapers. We have to, strip away the factories, the railways, even the medieval swords.
So go back to the very beginning.
Exactly. Before we can talk about any of that, we have to figure out why this metal is even here, buried in the mud, waiting for us to find it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I always assumed iron was just, part of the rocks, just stuff that formed when the earth formed.
Most people do.
But according to the sources, it didn't start in the dirt at all. It started in the stars.
It is one of the most poetic realities in all of physics, honestly. Iron is the ultimate cosmic endpoint. To really understand this, you have to picture a star.
Okay, picturing a giant ball of burning gas.
Right, but a star is essentially a massive ongoing battle between two forces. You have gravity, which is desperately trying to crush the star inward, and you have nuclear fusion, which is pushing outward.
And fusion is just, well, it's the star smashing lighter elements together to make heavier ones, right?
Exactly. It smashes hydrogen into helium, then helium into carbon, carbon into oxygen. And every single time those elements fuse, they release an enormous burst of outward energy.
So that energy fights the gravity.
Yes, that outward explosion is what holds the star up against its own crushing weight. It's like a balloon staying inflated because you're constantly blowing air into it.
But eventually, the star runs out of the light stuff, right? It keeps fusing heavier and heavier elements, working its way up the periodic table until it hits element 26.
Iron. And this is where the physics completely flip. Fusing iron is a literal death sentence for a star.
Wait, why?
Because unlike hydrogen or helium, fusing iron together does not release energy. It actually consumes energy.
Oh, wow. So it's like suddenly sucking the air out of the limb.
Instantly. The moment a massive star's core fuses into iron, that outward pressure holding the star up just vanishes. Gravity wins that billion-year tug of war in a fraction of a second.
That is terrifying to think about.
The entire outer mass of the star collapses inward at an unimaginable speed, smashes into that iron core, and violently rebounds in a supernova explosion.
I just need to pause and emphasize that to the listener. The nail holding up the picture frame on your wall, the microscopic iron coursing through the hemoglobin in your blood right now.
It's all stardust.
It is the literal ash of a dead star. It is the specific cosmic debris that killed its host star and triggered an explosion so bright it outshined entire galaxies.
That's the sheer scale we are dealing with here. And that stellar debris drifted through the vacuum of space for eons until it coalesced to form our solar system, Earth included.
That is just mind-blowing.
And iron is so abundant here that it is central to the planet's very identity. It's a transition metal, atomic number 26. But its true importance to us comes down to its physical reality.
Which is that it's incredibly dense and heavy.
Exactly.
Wait, though. If it's so heavy and the early Earth was basically a giant ball of molten lava, wouldn't all the heavy stuff just sink straight to the bottom? Why is there any iron left in the dirt for us to mine at all?
You are absolutely right, and a massive amount of it did exactly that. The vast majority of Earth's iron sank thousands of miles straight down.
So it's all in the center.
Yep. The Earth core is essentially a giant swirling sphere of liquid and solid iron-nickel alloy.
So we are essentially standing on a giant metal ball.
Yes. And we should be incredibly grateful for that, because iron has a very specific atomic quirk.
Okay, lay some chemistry on me.
At the atomic level, it has partially filled d orbitals. Now, without getting bogged down in a giant chemistry lecture, what that means is iron has unpaired electrons that can align in the same direction.
And that alignment creates
Magnetism. It gives iron its powerful magnetic
Oh,
behavior.
right. Magnetism.
So you have this massive ocean of liquid iron spinning and churning in the Earth's outer core, wrapped around a solid iron inner core. This creates a dynamo effect.
Like a giant generator.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
It generates the Earth's magnetic field, which stretches out into space and acts as a massive invisible shield for the whole planet.
And without that shield, we wouldn't be here, would we? Because the sun is constantly blasting out deadly solar radiation.
Solar winds, yeah. They would rip our atmosphere away and fry anything living on the surface.
So basically, if the Earth is a living organism, iron is its hidden muscle, and that magnetic field generated by the iron core is its immune system.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. I love that. But to your earlier point, not all the iron sank to the core. A significant amount remained trapped in the Earth's crust as it cooled.
But it wasn't just sitting there ready to be used, right? For billions of years, it wasn't the kind of iron we could just pick up and use to build a bridge.
Oh, no, not at all. Because the Earth was a very different place back then. Completely alien.
How alien are we talking?
Well, if you went back 3 billion years, the oceans were practically green. They were filled with massive amounts of dissolved iron, just floating in the water.
Green oceans.
And the atmosphere. Almost zero oxygen. You couldn't breathe.
Enter the cyanobacteria.
Yes, the great terraformers.
So what did they do?
Over 2 billion years ago, these microscopic, single-celled organisms in the ocean started doing something entirely new. Photosynthesis.
Taking in sunlight and making energy.
Right. They took in sunlight and started breathing out oxygen as a waste product.
And this is where the chemistry gets really fascinating, because what happens when you introduce oxygen into an ocean full of dissolved iron?
It rusts.
Exactly. The ocean literally started to rust.
Oxygen is highly reactive. The moment the cyanobacteria breathed it out, it bonded with the dissolved iron in the water. It oxidized.
And when it oxidizes, it changes state, right?
Yeah, when iron oxidizes, it turns into a solid. It became heavy and it precipitated out of the seawater, gently floating down to settle on the ocean floor.
Like a slow underwater snowstorm of red rust.
Exactly. And this didn't happen overnight. This process went on for tens to hundreds of millions of years.
So just layers and layers of it.
Yep. The bacteria would bloom, pump out oxygen, and a layer of iron would fall to the bottom. Then there would be a pause, and a layer of silica or shale would form. Then another bloom, another layer of iron.
Which created what geologists call banded iron formations, or BIFs.
Right.
I looked at pictures of these, and they are these massive, beautiful, striped rocks that you can find all over the world today. They look like a geologic barcode.
And those BIFs contain the vast majority of the iron ore we mine today.
Okay, this specific detail completely short-circuited my brain when I was prepping for this.
It's pretty wild.
To think about this, when you look at modern industrial civilization, you know, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Eiffel Tower, the towering skyline of Tokyo or New York,
Yeah.
all of that towering metal is literally built on the ancient biological waste of microscopic bacteria from 2 billion years ago. We are mining the consequences of ancient microbial breath to build our world.
It connects the absolute peak of human engineering directly to the origins of biological life. It really is profound.
It's hard to even wrap my head around.
But here's the catch. For early humans walking the Earth, those vast deposits of iron ore trapped in rock were completely useless.
Wait, why? If it's everywhere, why didn't we just start digging it up and making tools right away?
Because of that exact same affinity for oxygen we just talked about. Iron loves oxygen. It clings to it.
Oh, right. The rusting.
Because of that, iron almost never appears in nature as a pure, shiny metal. When an ancient human looked at a piece of hematite or magnetite ore, they didn't see a sword.
They just saw a rock.
Exactly. They just saw heavy red or black rock.
So how did we figure it out? If it just looks like a rock, how did humanity start its relationship with iron?
Well, we didn't look down into the dirt. We looked up.
Up at the sky.
Yeah. The earliest human encounters with pure metallic iron didn't come from a mine. They came from meteorites.
Meteoric iron. I read that the ancient Egyptians literally called it the metal of heaven.
Think about the psychological impact of that. You are living thousands of years ago. You have bronze, maybe some copper, but no concept of smelting iron from rock.
Right.
Then a streak of fire tears across the sky, smashes into the desert, and inside the crater you find a chunk of naturally occurring metallic iron alloyed with nickel. It's perfectly usable.
Because it formed in space where there was no oxygen to rust it.
Exactly. It required no smelting. A skilled artisan could take that space rock and just hammer it cold into a bead or an amulet or a dagger.
I think they actually found one of those, didn't they?
They did. King Tutankhamun was buried with a dagger made of meteoric iron. At that time, it was infinitely rarer and more valuable than gold. It was literally a gift from the gods.
But there's a limit to how many magic sky rocks you can find.
Right. You can't build an empire on meteorites.
Eventually, if humanity wanted to really utilize this metal, we had to figure out how to get it out of the dirt. And this brings up a transition that I always found a bit confusing in history class.
The transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age.
Yeah. Moving from bronze to iron. I always assumed iron replaced bronze because iron was just objectively better, but that's not true, is it?
Right. Not at all. In many ways, early iron was terrible compared to bronze.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Bronze is a fantastic metal, has a much lower melting point, which means ancient people could actually melt it into a liquid and pour it into beautiful, complex molds to make statues or identical spearheads.
That sounds super convenient.
And crucially, bronze resists corrosion beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't rot away in the rain like iron does.
So why on earth did we switch? If bronze is easier to cast, doesn't rust, and holds a great edge, why did humanity abandon it for this heavy, rusting nightmare metal?
It had nothing to do with the quality of the metal and everything to do with supply chains.
Supply chains, even back then.
Especially back then.
Yeah.
To make bronze, you need two things, copper and tin. Copper is relatively easy to find. Tin is exceptionally rare, and it is geographically concentrated in very specific pockets of the world.
Right, like Cornwall in England or parts of Afghanistan.
Exactly. So for the great Bronze Age empires of the Mediterranean and the Middle East to survive, they had to maintain these massive, fragile, incredibly long-distance trade networks just to get the tin they needed for their weapons and tools.
Wow, it sounds remarkably like our modern reliance on oil or rare earth minerals.
It's the exact same geopolitical vulnerability. And around 1200 BCE, during the late Bronze Age collapse, due to a mix of climate disasters, famines, and the migration of the mysterious sea peoples, those trade networks shattered.
So the tin stopped flowing.
Suddenly, massive empires were entirely cut off from their most vital material. You can't fight a war or harvest a massive crop if you can't get tin.
But iron ore is everywhere. It's one of the most abundant elements in the Earth's crust.
Exactly.
So every kingdom, every tribe, every small village likely had some form of iron ore beneath their feet.
Precisely. The shift to iron wasn't driven by quality. It was driven by desperation and democratization.
Democratization of metal. I like that.
You didn't need a 1,000-mile imperial trade network to get iron. You just needed dirt, fire, and an unbelievable amount of physical endurance. Iron democratized metal power.
But unlocking it from the dirt, the chemistry of that was an absolute nightmare for early humans, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because they had to break that bond we talked about. They had to rip the oxygen away from the iron. How do you even do that without modern chemistry?
You essentially have to learn how to imitate a volcano. You have to build a furnace. The earliest technology for this was called a bloomery.
Oh, bloomery. Okay.
You take the iron ore, the red rock, and you break it into small pieces. Then you layer it inside a clay chimney with charcoal.
Not wood, charcoal.
Yes, wood doesn't burn hot enough or consistently enough. So first, you have to spend days slowly roasting wood under a layer of dirt to make charcoal.
That's a ton of work before you even start the metal part.
Then you put the charcoal and the iron ore into the bloomery, and you light it. But even charcoal sitting there burning isn't enough. You have to force air into it.
The bellows.
Right. Someone, usually multiple people taking turns, has to pump massive leather bellows, blasting oxygen into the bottom of the furnace for hours, sometimes days on end.
That sounds exhausting.
The physical labor is staggering. You are standing next to a roaring clay oven, sweating profusely, pumping this lever endlessly to create an incredibly intense heat.
Now, I always pictured them just melting the rock, like ice turning into water and the shiny metal just flowing out of a tap at the bottom.
That's a super common misconception. Early bloomeries couldn't reach the melting point of pure iron. It simply wasn't hot enough. The iron never became a liquid pool.
So what was happening inside?
Instead, the charcoal is serving a dual purpose. Yes, it provides the heat, but more importantly, it provides carbon.
Okay, let's break down this chemistry, because the sources say this is the key to everything.
In the intense heat of the bloomery, the carbon from the burning charcoal acts as a chemical thief. It desperately wants to bond with oxygen.
So it steals it from the rock.
Exactly. It steals the oxygen atoms away from the solid iron ore. They bond to form carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide gas, which simply floats up and out the top of the chimney.
And what's left behind?
What's left behind at the bottom of the furnace is not a nice, clean, shiny bar of metal. It is a horrifying, glowing, spongy mass called a bloom.
A bloom. Sounds pretty, but I'm guessing it isn't.
Not at all. It's this porous clump of iron completely riddled with slag, which is the melted rock, sand, and impurities that were mixed in with the ore. It looks like a glowing metallic sponge filled with liquid glass.
Wow. Which brings us to the sheer physical punishment of the blacksmith. Because you can't just let that sponge cool down or it's useless, right?
No, while it is still roaring hot, glowing bright yellow, the blacksmith has to pull this heavy, dripping mass out of the furnace with tongs, throw it onto an anvil, and start beating it with heavy hammers.
They're literally squeezing the rock out of the metal.
Exactly. The rhythmic, agonizing, bone-jarring physical labor of hammering the bloom was designed to forcefully squeeze the liquid slag out of the iron sponge before it cooled.
So you hit it, fold it, hit it again?
You had to beat it flat, fold it over on itself, heat it back up, and beat it again. Over and over. You were physically forcing the iron molecules to weld together while expelling the dirt.
So the strength of the metal literally came from the muscle of the human. That's incredible.
This process produced what we call wrought iron. It's tough, it's fibrous, it's highly malleable. It was great for horseshoes or gates.
But humanity didn't stop there. I mean, wrought iron bends.
Right.
If you want to conquer the world, if you want to build a modern civilization, you need something that holds its edge. You need steel.
And steel is where iron transforms from a basic tool into an engineering marvel.
Mm.
Steel is a masterpiece of chemical balance.
How so?
Well, pure iron is relatively soft. The atoms in pure iron are arranged in a regular, sliding crystalline lattice. If you hit it, those layers of atoms just slide past each other. It bends.
I actually use a baking analogy to visualize this.
Oh, let's hear it.
Think of pure iron, like pure flour. Flour on its own is useless if you want to build a strong loaf of bread. It has no structure, it just falls apart.
Right.
But if you add the exact right amount of yeast and salt, which in this case is carbon, suddenly the flour binds together. It develops gluten, it has structure, it has strength. But if you add too much salt, the bread is ruined.
That is highly accurate. When you take iron and add just a tiny exact amount of carbon, usually less than 1%, those smaller carbon atoms wedge themselves perfectly into the gaps between the iron atoms.
They lock it up.
Exactly. They act like microscopic grit, locking the sliding layers of iron in place. It stops the bending.
But if you add too much carbon...
If you push the carbon content too high, say over 2%, you get cast iron. The lattice becomes so jammed with carbon that it can't slide at all.
So it gets really hard.
It becomes incredibly hard, but severely brittle. If you hit a piece of cast iron with a hammer, it won't bend. It will just shatter into sharp pieces.
The genius of steel is finding that perfect razor-thin middle ground. Tough enough to not bend, but flexible enough to not shatter.
And we didn't stop at carbon. Iron proved to be the ultimate platform for alloy engineering.
Mixing other stuff into it.
Right. You take that steel base and you add chromium, and suddenly you have stainless steel that resists rust. You add manganese, and it becomes incredibly strong and resistant to wear, perfect for railway tracks.
And what about high heat?
You add tungsten, and it retains its hardness at insanely high temperatures, allowing you to make high-speed drill bits.
I was reading through the metallurgical notes, and there is this beautiful, almost poetic, philosophical point tucked away in the science. It says, strength is not purity. Strength is controlled impurity.
It's a profound life lesson hiding in metallurgy. Pure iron is weak. It is only when we intentionally introduce flaws, when we carefully manage foreign elements and impurities, that the metal becomes capable of holding up a skyscraper or cutting through bone.
But despite all of this genius, despite the alloying and the hammering, iron has a tragic flaw. It has a mortal enemy that never sleeps.
Entropy, corrosion, rust.
Let's explain the actual physics of this, because it is an ongoing, invisible war happening all around us every single second.
It goes back to what we said earlier. Iron hates being alone. It desperately yearns to return to its natural, comfortable state in the earth.
It wants to be an oxide again.
Yes. When iron is exposed to oxygen and moisture, even just the humidity in the air, a microscopic tug of war begins.
The water acts as a conduit, right? An electrolyte.
Yes, the water allows electrons to move. The oxygen atoms in the air are incredibly electronegative. They are greedy for electrons. They physically tear electrons away from the iron atom.
And that breaks the bond.
This causes the iron atoms to break free from their solid metallic lattice and bond with the oxygen and hydrogen.
Which creates iron oxide, rust.
And the worst part about rust is that it expands. Unlike aluminum, which forms a hard, protective oxide layer that stops further corrosion, iron oxide flakes off.
It just crumbles away.
It swells, it crumbles, and it exposes the fresh iron underneath to the air, starting the process all over again until the entire piece of metal is completely eaten away, returning to the red powder we dug out of the ground.
It is a perpetual war. Every bridge spanning a river, every cargo ship crossing the ocean, every single cage of rebar hidden inside a concrete pillar is constantly, silently trying to rust away into dust.
We are constantly fighting it.
Human civilization is essentially a continuous, exhausting, multi-trillion-dollar battle against the chemical entropy of element 26.
And yet, despite the rust, despite the immense labor required to make it, this heavy, difficult metal became the ultimate amplifier of human civilization.
The amplifier, I like that word for it.
Once we figured out how to temper iron into steel, it completely altered our relationship with time, distance, and power.
Let's trace that timeline, because you can literally graph the acceleration of human history right alongside our mastery of the forge. And it didn't start with weapons, right? It started with food.
The agricultural revolution was supercharged by iron. Before iron became widespread, plows were made of wood, or sometimes tipped with bronze.
Which works fine in some places.
Sure, that might work fine in the soft, sandy soils of the Mediterranean or the Middle East. But as human populations expanded into places like Northern Europe, they encountered heavy, dense, wet, clay-rich soils.
A wooden plow is just going to bounce right off that or snap in half.
Exactly. But you strap a heavy iron blade to a plow, hitch it to an ox, and suddenly you can slice deep into that heavy earth. You take an iron axe, which is far cheaper and tougher than bronze, and you can clear dense ancient forests in a fraction of the time.
And the causal chain there is undeniable. More cleared land and deeper plowing means you can grow significantly more food.
And more food changes everything.
More calories mean populations can explode. When populations explode, you get specialized labor. People don't all have to farm, so they become scholars or builders or soldiers. You get the growth of dense cities. And crucially, you give states the ability to collect surplus wealth as taxes.
Iron amplified our biological ability to extract calories from the earth. Before iron was a sword, it was bread.
But of course, it didn't take long for the kings and emperors collecting those taxes to figure out what else iron could do.
It became the foundation of empire. Look at the Assyrians in the ancient Middle East. They were among the first to truly integrate iron weapons and armor into a massive, organized military force, allowing them to project terrifying imperial power.
And the Romans, when we think of Rome, we usually visualize marble columns, togas, and philosophers. But that is a mirage.
Rome was an iron empire. It was built on iron pickaxes digging the roads, iron clamps physically holding the massive stone aqueducts together, iron weapons equipping the legions, and millions of iron chains binding the enslaved populations that drove their economy.
Wow.
Rome was a machine made of iron and blood.
But even with all that power, production was still relatively limited. The real explosion, the moment where iron truly swallowed the world, was the Industrial Revolution. And the bottleneck there, surprisingly, wasn't a lack of iron ore. It was a lack of fuel.
Right. For thousands of years, the only way to get the carbon needed to smelt iron was charcoal, which means you need wood.
Lots of wood.
By the 16th and 17th centuries, the demand for iron was so high that we were literally deforesting entire continents just to feed the bloomeries and early blast furnaces. Britain was chopping down its ancient forest at an unsustainable rate.
They were hitting an ecological ceiling. They couldn't make more iron without destroying the landscape.
Until the 18th century, when humanity learned how to use rock instead of wood. Coal.
But you couldn't just throw raw coal into a furnace, right?
No, the sulfur and impurities in raw coal would make the iron horribly brittle.
So they invented a process called coking.
Exactly. You bake the coal in an oxygen-free environment to burn off the impurities, leaving behind a pure, porous chunk of carbon called coke.
And why is coke better?
Coke burns incredibly hot, it's strong enough to support the immense weight of a towering blast furnace without crushing, and it provides the carbon needed for the chemical reduction.
This shifted the entire center of gravity of iron production from the forests to the coal fields, and it unleashed a feedback loop that completely changed the planet.
It is the ultimate positive feedback loop in human history. We use the new coke-smelted iron to build massive steam engines,
And what did we use the steam engines for?
to pump water out of deep coal mines so we could mine more coal. We use that extra coal to make even more iron. We use that iron to build bigger blast furnaces.
And then came the Bessemer process in the mid-19th century,
That was the game changer.
which allowed us to blast air through molten iron to burn off the excess carbon, creating steel cheaply and at an unbelievable massive scale. Suddenly, steel wasn't just for a sword or a specialized tool, it was for everything.
What did we do with that mass-produced steel? We conquered geography. We built railroads.
Spanning whole countries.
We took entire continents, like North America, that used to take agonizing, dangerous months to cross on horseback or wagon, and we turned them into iron corridors that could be crossed in days.
And the oceans, too.
We built steel-hulled ships that ignored the wind and redrew the maps of global trade. Iron compressed human distance.
But it's also severely compressed human violence.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the military amplifier. Iron does not make moral choices, it merely magnifies whatever human decisions we make. It just says yes to whatever we want to build.
That is the dark, unavoidable reality of this metal. The exact same metallurgical genius that allowed us to build safer bridges and towering skyscrapers allowed us to engineer deadlier battlefields.
In World War I, warfare became fully industrialized. The battlefields of the Somme or Verdun were defined by barbed wire, which is simply miles of mass-produced drawn steel, and the machine gun.
It was no longer about individual heroism, it was about industrial slaughter.
And by World War II, metallurgy had evolved from static trench warfare into pure mechanized maneuverability. The Sherman tanks, the U-boats, the massive aircraft carriers, the millions of artillery shells raining down on cities.
The scale of resources required for that is genuinely hard to comprehend.
Give me a specific example.
Look at the Mesabi Range in northern Minnesota. It is a massive geological formation of iron ore. Since it opened in 1890, that single range has produced billions of metric tons of ore.
Billions.
It effectively fed the entire American industrial machine in its wartime dominance throughout the 20th century. The outcome of the greatest global conflicts in human history wasn't just decided by ideology or tactics. It was dictated by who could pull the most iron out of the dirt and turn it into steel the fastest.
So what does this all mean? What does this look like today? I asked you to pull the modern economic numbers on this, and honestly, they're staggering.
In 2024, the world produced 1,886 million tons of crude steel.
Let me just pause and repeat that so it sinks in. Almost 2 billion tons in a single year.
It's an astronomical figure. You can barely visualize it, and the geopolitics behind that number are intense. Out of that, roughly 1.9 billion tons, China alone produced over 1 billion tons.
Wow, they absolutely dominate global steelmaking today.
They do.
And the U.S. isn't small either, producing about 82 million tons of raw steel in 2025, which carries an estimated value of $149 billion. Hearing those numbers, it makes me look at the news differently.
How so?
When you look at a map of the modern world, are you really just looking at arbitrary borders drawn by politicians? Or are you looking at borders drawn by iron ore deposits, coal seams, and steel mills?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are looking at geological borders.
Yeah.
Without question, control of iron has permanently shifted global power structures.
Right.
It moved power from agrarian kingdoms who relied on land, to military empires who relied on conquest, and finally to modern industrialized nation-states and multinational corporations.
Because steel isn't just a commodity you trade, like coffee or silk.
Exactly. Countries do not treat steel like a simple decorative commodity. They treat it as the ultimate proxy for industrial sovereignty.
If you can't make it, you're at the mercy of who can.
If you do not have the capacity to make steel, you cannot build your own infrastructure, you cannot manufacture your own vehicles, and you absolutely cannot defend your borders. You are entirely dependent on someone else.
It is the great magnifier. It's the exact same base material in a hospital support beam and a prison bar. A surgical scalpel saving a life, and an artillery shell ending one. Iron doesn't care.
But getting that iron to say yes
Yeah.
to us, getting it out of the ground and into those shapes, comes at a staggering, brutal cost.
I'm really glad we are pivoting here because this is where I want to aggressively push back on the romanticization of the Iron Age and the industrial era.
It's easy to look back with rose-colored glasses.
We all know the aesthetic, right? We look at those old black and white photos of the steel magnates with their top hats, the grand ribbon-cutting ceremonies of massive suspension bridges, the brave ironworkers sitting on a girder eating lunch hundreds of feet in the air.
It looks so triumphant. It feels like the ultimate victory of human ingenuity.
But there is a severe, violent disconnect between the wealthy industrialists who profited from the steel and the workers whose bodies were literally broken making it. The skyscraper goes up, but someone had to carry that heavy stone out of the dark, and we rarely talk about the dark.
The historical labor cost of iron is drenched in human suffering. Go back to ancient Rome or imperial China. Mining wasn't a career choice.
It was forced labor.
It was almost
wasn't it?
entirely reliant on enslaved laborers, prisoners of war, or conquered populations. Being sent to the iron or copper mines was effectively a slow death sentence. You worked in near total darkness, breathing in a toxic dust until your body gave out.
And even as we moved away from antiquity and into the early industrial era in Europe and America, the cruelty just changed shape. Who was sent down into the tightest, most claustrophobic, poorly ventilated mine shafts to drag out coal and ore?
Children.
Because they were small.
Because they were small enough to fit in the narrowest seams, they were incredibly cheap to employ, and they were entirely powerless to advocate for themselves.
And the smelting process above ground was just as much of a nightmare. You have men pumping massive bellows by hand for hours, breathing in toxic carbon monoxide fumes, standing inches away from furnaces, radiating heat so intense it could literally blind you over time by cooking the proteins in your eyes.
Cataracts were known as glassblower's disease or puddler's disease among iron workers for exactly that reason. And even as technology advanced, as we moved from hand bellers to massive mechanized blast furnaces, the physical danger didn't disappear. It just scaled up.
What does modern extraction look like? Because we aren't sending kids down with pickaxes anymore, but we are pulling almost 2 billion tons of this stuff out of the earth.
Modern extraction is a masterclass in massive logistics, but the scale of the machinery makes the dangers catastrophic. Today, the vast majority of iron comes from gigantic open-pit mines.
Like the ones you can see from space.
Exactly. Look at the Pilbara region in Western Australia or the Carajás mine in the Amazon rainforest of Brazil. We are no longer talking about tunnels. We are talking about gigantic terraced craters dug into the earth that are so massive they are clearly visible from orbit.
Walk me through the actual physical process of getting the rock out today.
It is a mind-numbing chain of heavy industry. First, you drill deep holes into the terraced benches of the mine. You pack those holes with thousands of pounds of high explosives and blast the solid rock face into rubble.
And then what?
Then, electric rope shovels machines so large they look like office buildings scoop up that rubble and drop it into haul trucks.
And these aren't just dump trucks.
No, these are behemoths. A single haul truck can carry 300 to 400 tons of rock in a single load. The tires alone are 12 feet tall.
That's insane.
They haul the ore up out of the crater and dump it into massive mechanized crushers that grind the boulders down into smaller pieces. From there, it goes onto miles-long conveyor belts, gets loaded onto trains that can be over a mile long, and is shipped to coastal ports where it's dumped into the holds of bulk carrier ships the size of skyscrapers.
And at every single step of that logistical chain, the human danger is severe. I was looking at the safety protocols, and the International Labor Organization actually has a dedicated, massive code of practice specifically for safety and health in the iron and steel industry. The hazards are uniquely stubborn.
You're dealing with extreme forces. In the mines, the primary slow killer is dust. Breathing in silica dust from the fractured rock causes silicosis, a progressive, incurable scarring of the lungs.
And in the mills?
In the steel mills, workers face ambient heat stress that can shut down the body's organs. They face the risk of severe burns from molten metal that is over 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. You have massive overhead cranes moving ladles holding hundreds of tons of liquid steel. If a cable snaps or a crane fails, the results are instantly fatal.
The numbers bear this out. We pulled a recent report from World Steel, the global industry association, and they noted that among their member companies, there were 67 fatalities in 2024 alone.
It's a sobering statistic.
Now, they were quick to point out that the lost time injury frequency rate has fallen substantially over the decades, reaching its lowest recorded level. That proves that intense safety cultures and automation can work. But the grim reality remains. 67 people went to work at a mine or a mill and did not go home to their families. The work resists total safety.
And the danger of this industry isn't just confined to the workers wearing hard hats. It extends to entire communities and ecosystems downstream. If we're talking about the brutal bargain of iron, we have to talk about tailings dams.
This is one of the most terrifying industrial concepts I've ever learned about. What exactly is a tailings dam?
When you mine iron ore, especially lower grade ore, you can't just ship out the whole rock. You have to crush it and use water and chemicals to separate the valuable iron from the useless sand and clay.
Which makes a mess.
It creates an enormous amount of highly toxic, watery sludge called tailings.
And you can't just dump toxic sludge in a river.
Right. So mining companies build massive earthen dams across valleys near the mine to hold this sludge back. They essentially create artificial toxic lakes. And because the mine is constantly operating, these lakes just keep growing higher and higher over decades.
And when you build a massive dam out of earth to hold back liquid mud, sometimes the physics fail.
When a tailings dam fails, it is apocalyptic. The sludge undergoes a process called liquefaction. It instantly behaves like a heavy liquid, and the dam simply dissolves.
That sounds like a nightmare scenario.
I want to highlight two horrific recent examples from Brazil to show the scale of this. In 2015, the Mariana Dam collapsed. It killed 19 people and unleashed a wave of toxic mud that utterly annihilated the Doce River basin, killing millions of fish and destroying the livelihoods of thousands of people along the river.
But 2019 was even worse, wasn't it?
The Brumadinho disaster. At an iron ore mine in Minas Gerais, a massive tailings dam suffered a catastrophic failure. There was almost no warning. A tidal wave of dense, heavy, toxic mud roared down the valley at highway speeds. It hit the mine's own cafeteria during lunch hour. It hit nearby houses, farms, and roads.
It killed 270 people. I remember reading that 2 pregnant women died. The sheer mass of the sludge just buried everything in its path under dozens of feet of mud.
It highlights a profound, terrifying reality about modern extraction. Mining doesn't just harvest a resource, it transforms geography into permanent industrial logistics.
We leave massive scars.
We don't just extract ore and leave a hole. We permanently rearrange entire ecosystems. We leave diverted rivers, massive scars on the earth, and these towering toxic lakes that have to be monitored and managed forever. The waste product of iron can be just as dangerous as its extraction.
And the socioeconomic impact of this industry cuts just as deep into human communities. Iron built the concept of the company town.
Absolutely. Because ore deposits are usually far away from existing cities, companies had to build whole towns from scratch around a single mine or a single steel mill.
Yeah.
And that created a very sharp, double-edged bargain.
The company provides the job, they build the housing, they stock the grocery store, but the company also completely controls your survival. If you strike, you don't just lose your job, you get evicted from your home.
Which naturally locks these towns into extreme boom and bust cycles. When global demand for steel is high, say, during a war or an infrastructure boom, the town thrives. The furnaces run 247.
But when demand drops,
Or when global overcapacity floods the market with cheap steel from elsewhere, the mills close.
and the town just dies.
Exactly. For context, a paper from the Global Forum on Steel Excess Capacity noted that steel employment in their member countries actually fell by about 9% between 2013 and 2021. That's hundreds of thousands of jobs lost to shifting global markets and increasing automation.
But out of that dependency, out of that shared danger and physical suffering, came something incredible. The labor movement. The exact same metal that broke workers' bodies also forged their solidarity.
The history of labor rights is deeply intertwined with miners and steelworkers. Because they worked in such massive, coordinated environments, they realized their collective power.
They banded together.
They fought, often facing violent retribution from private police or the state, for the 8-hour workday, for safer working conditions, for the right to collective bargaining and union recognition.
They gained immense hard-earned pride in their endurance and their skill. You talk to a retired steelworker, and there is a profound dignity in what they did. But they bore the physical destruction of their own bodies to do it. The working class built the modern world with their lungs, their limbs, and their lifespan.
It is the ultimate paradox of human progress. We pulled powering strength from stone,
Uh-huh.
but we paid for it with generations of bodies.
Which brings us to the psychological core of this entire deep dive. Because iron required so much discipline, so much fire, and so much physical suffering to master, it didn't just stay in our hands. It deeply infiltrated our minds, our myths, and our language. This is the section of the material titled The Mountain Beneath the Mountain.
It's a fascinating cultural phenomenon. Think about the mythology of the blacksmith in antiquity.
They are always these weird liminal figures.
Universal across almost every culture. In Greco-Roman myth, you have Hephaestus or Vulcan. In Yoruba tradition in West Africa, you have Ogun. The smith is rarely a central king or a radiant god of light.
Right, they're usually kind of pushed to the side.
They are often depicted as physically deformed, isolated, working in the dark, smoky fringes of the community. Yet they are deeply revered and feared.
Why the fear? They're just making tools.
Because to an ancient person, what a blacksmith does isn't engineering. It's alchemy. It's magic. They command hidden, terrifying forces. They take a cold, dead, heavy rock, they subject it to terrifying, blinding heat, and they pull a shining, lethal sword out of the fire. They are transforming the elements of the earth.
And that sense of magic bled directly into folklore. I was fascinated by the concept of cold iron. Across European folklore, there is this pervasive idea that fairies, elves, or supernatural spirits are physically burned or repelled by iron.
You see it everywhere. Nailing an iron horseshoe above a doorway to ward off evil spirits. Putting a piece of iron in a newborn's crib to stop fairies from stealing the child.
Why iron? Why not gold or silver?
Because iron represented human grounding. It represented boundaries. Think about what iron does. It cuts down the ancient forests, it plows the wild earth into neat rows of crops, it forms the weapons that guard the city gates.
It pushes back nature.
Iron was the ultimate symbol of human civilization and rational order, violently pushing back against the chaotic, untamed, magical wilderness of nature. Fairies hate iron because iron is the death of the wild.
Oh, that is brilliant. Here's where it gets really interesting, because you can see that exact same psychological weight in our language today. The idioms are everywhere, and they all point to the same energy.
Give me some examples.
We say someone has an iron will. We talk about an ironclad contract. Winston Churchill popularized the term iron curtain to describe an impenetrable ideological divide. We tell people to strike while the iron is hot.
Notice what metal we don't use in those contexts. We never say someone has a golden will.
Right. Gold is about beauty. It's about wealth, status, and ornamentation. Gold says, look at me.
But iron says, depend on me. Iron signifies sheer utility and resilience. We trust iron. We emotionally bonded with it because it is associated with structure, durability, and bearing weight.
Which brings us to an incredibly unique source in our stack today. These are the profound philosophical reflections from a subpersonality named Val. She has this framework she calls the climb.
It's a very powerful metaphor.
And she frames human life, the struggle of existence, as a series of mountains. Growth isn't something that just happens to you. It is earned through sweat, through strategy, and through a stubborn, willful refusal to stay at the base of the mountain when the summit calls.
It is a striking parallel to metallurgy. She uses this deeply evocative imagery of a sky of iron and flame. She describes the daily grind of life not as a punishment, but as a forge-like refinement. It's psychological metallurgy.
Yes, humans unconsciously recognize that our own psychological and emotional growth perfectly mirrors the creation of steel. Let's go back to the bloomery. Pure iron straight out of the earth is weak. It bends.
Right.
To become strong, it has to be subjected to intense, suffocating heat. It has to be violently struck with a heavy hammer, folded over, and plunged into cold water. It is a violent, stressful, agonizing process.
But that exact pressure is what gives it strength.
We project that onto ourselves. We fundamentally believe that human character is hammered out through hardship. Val's philosophy of the climb is that the resistance of the mountain, the gravity pulling you down, the cold wind, the burning in your lungs, that is a hammer. That is the fire. You don't become strong by avoiding the fire. You become strong by surviving it.
But there is a vital, crucial distinction in the metallurgy that perfectly applies to psychology here. The best steel is not merely hard.
Hardness versus toughness. Let's debate this, because this is where the metaphor peaks.
In metallurgy, if you add too much carbon, you make the steel incredibly hard. It won't scratch and it won't bend, but it loses its toughness. It becomes brittle.
So it breaks easily.
A sword that is perfectly hard but lacks toughness might hold an incredibly sharp edge, but the very first time it strikes a heavy shield in battle, it will literally shatter into a million useless pieces.
Human character is the exact same way. We all know people who've been through intense hardship, and they decided to become hard. They put up massive emotional walls. They become cynical, rigid, and unyielding. They think that makes them strong.
But they are brittle. The moment a truly unexpected trauma or life shock hits them, they don't bend. They shatter. They break down completely because they have no flexibility.
We must be tough, not just hard. Val's climb isn't about becoming an emotionless stone. It's about becoming high-carbon steel. You must be tough enough to hold your shape and maintain your boundaries under immense pressure, but you must remain flexible enough to absorb the shocking blows of life without breaking.
That is a powerful framework. And it wasn't just individuals who tied their psychological identity to this metal. Entire societies did. Through the 19th and 20th centuries, industrial societies totally fused their national pride with their steel outfit.
Think of the great steel cities, Sheffield and Birmingham in England, Pittsburgh in the United States with its massive fiery mills leading up the night sky, the Ruhr Valley in Germany.
Or look at Magnitogorsk in the Soviet Union. It was practically a mythic propaganda city built from scratch in the Ural Mountains around a massive steelworks, designed specifically to outproduce the West. Steel output became the ultimate undeniable status symbol of a state's capacity, its modernization, and its geopolitical dominance.
We built our entire global identity, our massive economies, and our deep psychology on this one metal. But here is the massive existential problem we are facing right now. The chemical reality of how we make all this steel is currently threatening the very climate that sustains our civilization.
We are caught in the carbon trap. And the numbers are incredibly grim. According to World Steel, global steel production emitted roughly 4.1 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2024.
4.1 billion tons.
That represents about 7 to 8% of all global anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, just from this one single industry. The International Energy Agency has made it abundantly clear. If humanity has any hope of hitting net zero emissions and avoiding catastrophic climate tipping points, the emissions from iron and steel have to fall off a cliff this decade.
Okay, I have to stop and ask the obvious question here. If we know it's terrible, and we are transitioning the rest of the grid to solar, wind, and nuclear, why can't we just plug the steel factories into a wind turbine? Why is this specific industry so incredibly difficult to clean up?
Because it's not just an energy problem, it's a chemical trap. This is the crux of the issue. In traditional steelmaking inside a blast furnace, you aren't just burning coal to get the furnace hot. If it were solely about generating heat, you're right, we could use massive electric arc heaters powered by nuclear plants.
But the coal's doing two jobs.
Exactly. Go back to the bloomery. The carbon in the coal is acting as a chemical reagent. We physically need the carbon atoms to chemically strip the oxygen atoms away from the iron oxide ore.
Oh, because they bond together.
The carbon binds with the oxygen to create carbon dioxide gas, leaving the pure iron behind. Carbon is both the fuel creating the heat and the necessary chemical key to unlocking the metal.
So the very chemistry that makes iron extraction possible is the exact same chemistry that is boiling the planet. That is terrifying.
It is.
Well, what about alternatives? Can we just stop using so much steel? What if we build skyscrapers out of aluminum?
Aluminum is fantastic. It's light, it doesn't rust the way iron does, and it's great for airplanes and soda cans, but it simply doesn't have the structural yield strength to support a 60-story building. It would buckle.
What about titanium? That's super strong and light.
Titanium is a miracle metal, but it is astronomically expensive and incredibly difficult to machine. You can't build a massive suspension bridge out of it without bankrupting a nation.
Carbon fiber.
Amazing for high-performance sports cars or aerospace, but again, incredibly costly, slow to manufacture, and notoriously difficult to recycle. Nothing in the entire periodic table matches steel's highly specific blend of immense structural strength, ridiculous abundance in the earth, dirt-cheap cost, and total recyclability.
Even concrete needs it, right?
Right. Even concrete, which we use everywhere, is great for handling compression, but it snaps under tension. It absolutely requires steel rebar inside it to hold buildings together.
So we are completely stuck with steel. We can't abandon it, which means we have to find a way to fundamentally reinvent the forge. We have to make it green. How do we do that without carbon?
There are a few pathways, and it's a race against time. The first and easiest is greater scrap recycling using electric arc furnaces.
How does that work?
If you already have pure steel, say from demolished buildings or crushed old cars, you don't need to strip oxygen away from ore. The chemical reduction is already done.
Oh, that makes sense.
So you can just dump that scrap steel into a massive cauldron, lower giant graphite electrodes into it, and blast it with pure electricity until it melts. If that electricity comes from solar or nuclear, the process is practically zero carbon.
That sounds great. Why don't we just do that for everything?
Because of simple math.
Yeah.
There simply isn't enough scrap steel in the world to meet the rising global demand, especially because emerging economies are still building their initial infrastructural base. They don't have old skyscrapers to tear down yet. They need new steel forged from raw rock.
Which leads us to the holy grail of metallurgy right now. Hydrogen direct reduced iron. I really want to understand the mechanics of this.
This is the most promising, albeit difficult, technological leap. Remember how we use carbon to steal the oxygen away from the iron ore, creating carbon dioxide?
Yes.
Well, hydrogen is also highly reactive. If you pump pure hydrogen gas into a specially designed reactor filled with iron ore, the hydrogen will react with the oxygen in the ore. But instead of emitting carbon dioxide,
H2 plus O, it makes H2O, water.
exactly. The chemical byproduct of smelting the iron becomes nothing but pure water vapor floating out the smokestack.
That sounds like actual magic. Why aren't we doing this everywhere right now?
Two massive hurdles: infrastructure and economics. First, you need an unfathomable amount of pure hydrogen gas. And to make this truly green, you have to split water to get that hydrogen using massive amounts of renewable electricity, what we call green hydrogen.
And we don't have enough of that.
We simply do not have the green electricity grid required to produce that much hydrogen yet.
And the second hurdle?
Money. Operating a 100% green hydrogen steel plant is vastly more expensive right now. Early estimates suggest it costs 50 to 140% more to produce a ton of green steel compared to a dirty blast furnace.
So I have to ask you a very direct, very difficult question based on this reality. Are we trapped? Look at emerging economies. India produced about 149 million tons of steel last year, and their economy is growing rapidly.
It is.
Nations across Southeast Asia and Africa are urbanizing. They need to build their rail networks, their hospitals, their bridges. If scrap steel isn't enough and green hydrogen steel is too expensive, how do we avoid boiling the planet while still giving them the exact same standard of living that the West built over the last century using cheap, dirty steel?
This raises an important question, maybe the most important geopolitical and moral question of the next 3 decades. Humanity is not transitioning away from iron. We are desperately, frantically trying to transition away from the carbon-heavy way we process it. The new industrial climb Val's mountain is moving from ore to empire to ore to a survivable civilization.
And the geopolitics of the future are going to completely revolve around this.
Absolutely. We're going to see intense global battles over trade rules. Western nations that heavily subsidize green steel are going to implement carbon border tariffs.
Meaning, if a country produces clean steel, they will slap a massive tax on imported cheap, dirty steel, creating massive trade wars.
Exactly. It will fundamentally alter global supply chains. We will also see a frantic scramble for the highest grade iron ores.
Why does the grade matter more now?
Because low-carbon steelmaking technologies, specifically hydrogen direct reduction, currently require much higher quality, purer iron ore to work efficiently compared to traditional blast furnaces.
So the new tech is picky.
A blast furnace is a beast. It can melt almost any dirty rock you throw on it. The green tech is much pickier. So the power dynamics of global mining might aggressively shift toward the few regions that hold those specific premium clean ore bodies.
It's going to be a massive bottleneck. A bottleneck of clean electricity, green hydrogen infrastructure, and premium rock.
It is a monumental, almost terrifying task. We are having to completely reinvent the chemical bedrock of human infrastructure, while the clock is ticking down on the climate. It is the hardest, most complex industrial transformation since the Industrial Revolution itself.
To try and synthesize everything we've gone through today, sitting here looking at the invisible cage around us, iron is clearly not just element 26 on the periodic table. It is humanity's hardest, most demanding, most unforgiving teacher. From the stardust that forged it and the death of a sun, to the ancient bacteria that deposited it on the ocean floor, to the meteors that first introduced us to its power.
It taught us the most fundamental lesson of our history, that civilization isn't simply found lying on the ground. It is forged. It requires intense, backbreaking labor, extreme heat, and absolute unwavering discipline.
It punishes our hubris with rust, constantly reminding us that nature eventually reclaims everything. It breaks the bodies of those forced to pull it from the dark. And it offers us, completely indiscriminately, the power to either feed the world with plows and railways, or tear the world apart with artillery shells and barbed wire.
It is the mountain beneath the mountain.
And that leaves us with a lingering thought. A question I want you to take with you the next time you drive over a massive steel suspension bridge, or the next time you look up at a towering city skyline cutting into the clouds.
What is the question?
The history we unpack today tells us that iron taught humanity how to build upward and outward by mastering the physical geological world. But as we face the monumental existential task of reinventing the forge to save our climate from the very chemistry that built it, we have to ask a deeper question. Was iron's final lesson ever really about mastering the earth? Or has it spent the last 3,000 years patiently waiting for us to finally master ourselves?